Hello, my name is William Winkle, and I'm with the Detroit Historical Society, and it is December 22nd, and we are in Detroit, Michigan. This interview is for the Detroit Historical Society's 1967 Oral History Project, and I am here with Mike Hamlin. Thank you very much for sitting down with me today.
I'm delighted.
Can you tell me where and when were you born?
Yeah, I was born in 1935, October 17, in a rural area on a plantation near Canton, Mississippi. My father and his family, my family, were sharecroppers on that plantation. They worked farms and divided the products, the production of cotton with the owners, and it was a very exploitive kind of situation. My father was the youngest of three, and he had been abandoned. His family, he and my grandmother and my aunt and uncle had been abandoned by his father when they were teenagers, and they had to scrape through to adulthood under very dire circumstances. My mother was a product of a plantation owner's son, and her mother died when she was 33 and left her as an orphan. And she couldn't stay on the plantation where she was born with her father and his family, so she was kind of shunted around from one black relative to another because, you know, they were rural folks, and if you understand about the thinking of peasants, agriculture workers, you could say they, in my view, they were semi-peasant. They, makes you very selfish, working like that, looking like that. So she had a very difficult time, and I think at 15, she married my father, who was a very bad guy, irresponsible, reckless, and could be brutal. And I was born. She married him when she was 16, so she and I kind of grew up together. I tried as best I could to protect her, but he was very abusive. And all of this is shaping my thinking as I'm growing up. On the place that we lived, there was we lived in a shack, no running water, outhouse, a farm. We made vegetables. He hunted. We raised vegetables. They would hunt rabbits, possums, and squirrels, and birds, and fish. And so we had enough to sustain us, but at the same time, my father started bootlegging whiskey. He started making whiskey, and he made a lot of whiskey. He made a lot of money, but he blew it all. He was I said he was reckless and irresponsible. So he was just a wild man, and so this had to do with my it shaped my view. I was always trying to make my mother's life better. So I used to go with her when she would go and work at the plantation owner's house, and the plantation owner tried to get my mother to give me to her, and she wouldn't do it. And but But she did that because I could do a lot of things, even though I was a child. At some point, my father, who enjoyed police protection from the sheriff, who supposedly protected him from his operation from the IRS or whatever his equivalent was at that time, raided his still and destroyed it all. So the sheriff came for, I don't know if you want all this kind of information, but the sheriff came to the house to collect his monthly $75 payment. And my father told him he didn't have any money. So he told him that this was in 1944. He told him that, well, I'll be back here tonight and you better have it. Now, I had seen two mobs riding through our place, watering their horses and dogs and themselves at the pump that we had, on their way into the forest looking for a black that they were going to lynch. They caught one, the other one got away. So after my dad had this encounter with the sheriff, he took off. And he made it to Kansas City, where I had an aunt. My aunt had moved. And shortly thereafter, my mother moved to Kansas City with him. And my grandmother and I and my sister moved, my younger sister, moved into Canton, the town. I think I was 9 years old. And I got a job in the store. By the way, in terms of school, I did not go to start school until 2 years after I was old enough, because I was babysitting my sister while my mother worked in the cotton field. I'd be sitting on a blanket near the edge of the field, and she'd be out there picking cotton, and I'd be there entertaining my little sister. So when I ended up, I started school about third grade, and I had a lot of catching up to do, but I handled that. We went to town, and we went to Canton, moved to Canton, and lived in a house there that my aunt had lived in, and I went to school there for 2 years. I got this job in a liquor store. Almost got killed because the owners, a young white couple, had me doing all kinds of things, and I could do any job in the store, including, the cash register, the meat counter, stock, whatever. And they enjoyed watching that. They were just amused that I was big for my age, 10 years old. And they had a nephew about your size, 17 years old. He was a high school football player. And he didn't like me because they liked me. And so he worked there during the summer when he was in school, when he was out of school. So one day, I went back to the back of the store to get something out of the meat the cooler. And he was standing there in the door with a sharp knife, butcher's knife. And he was coming at me with it. And it slipped out of his hand and stuck in his foot. And he howled. Of course, I didn't laugh. But that probably saved my life, because he could kill me, and that would have been nothing said about it. But anyway, eventually my father, he had gotten run out of Mississippi, then he got ran out of Kansas City, Missouri, because he got into some arguing with a guy in a bar, probably over a woman or something, and he opened fire at this man point blank, and he shot him once in the leg. So he had to flee from Kansas City, and he came here. And after he came here, it was in 1946 and 47. He brought me and my sister here. My mother and my grandmother went to Kansas City. So that brought me to Detroit. And that was in August of 1947. And we started the school in September.
Where did you move to in the city?
In Ecorse.
Ecorse?
Yeah, in Ecorse, which was an industrial town with a lot of people from the South, a lot of people from Mississippi, people that my folks knew. And it was divided by railroad tracks, and there were blacks on one side and whites on the other. But we all went to the same high school. We went to segregated elementary schools, and the junior high school was attached to the high school. So beginning in the 7th grade, we began integrated school.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, we didn't have any problems. Now, I had a very interesting experience. My first, I don't know whether this is relevant to
it all is. Keep going.
Yeah. I remember I said we came here in August of 47. Took the train in to Grand Central Station. I think that's what it was called at the time.
Michigan Central?
Michigan Central, yeah. And took a cab out to Ecorse. And in September, which was the next month, school started. And I went to school, and my first day in school, the teacher and the whole class laughed at me because of my accent. So, one of the things about being born in Mississippi is you develop a deep feeling of humility. So rather than being crushed, I just felt that I was behind and I had to catch up. And so, boy, did I catch up. This was an interracial experience from 7th grade on up. And by the time I was a sophomore, I was, for the next 2 years, the leading athlete in my school, basketball, football, tennis. And because I never played tennis, I had no idea. But I had a friend who was like a year younger than me, but he was like a mentor. And I studied him. His father, and interestingly enough, he was a graduate of Colgate. He had a mechanical engineering degree, and the first job he got was as the principal of a high school in South Carolina. But when Ford started paying $5 an hour, but $5 a day, he moved here and moved his wife here. And he worked at the Rouge in the foundry for 43 years. And he became a part-time undertaker. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I used to spend a lot of time at his house. And I learned from there, and I became by high school, nobody in my house had ever even gone past 8th grade, much less going to college. As I was approaching graduation, most of my friends were going into factories, Great Lake Steel. Are you from here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I'm from Downriver.
Yeah, Great Lake Steel and Ford. And my father told me I was working. I started working when I got here at 10 years, part-time at the liquor store, at a grocery store, and then later a liquor store. And my father told me, don't go to college, stay where you are with that liquor store. So I usually did the opposite of whatever he told me. I thought that was a good rule. So Garnet, my friend, mentor, was going to U of M. He had a Ford scholarship. He was going to be a doctor. So I was probably in the top 5 academically by then. thought I might try playing basketball. So I decided to go to U of M with him. That summer, the basketball coach, Mr. Reilly, got me a scholarship, not a scholarship, got me a job rehabbing a school in Ecorse that was, needed work. So I worked with that and made pretty good money. So I could pay for my first year.
Mm-hmm.
Second year, I got a job at Ford during the summer, and I worked there for 89 days, and they laid me off. But I did have enough to go back and finish 2 more years. And after that, this was in 1956. I couldn't get a job. That was during the Eisenhower recession. I couldn't get a job, so I didn't go back to school in September. But I continued to look for a job, and the only job I got was in February. During the one day when it snowed, my uncle and I got a job in Wyandotte at a car wash. I spent one day in that job, and I told my uncle the next day I wasn't going back, and I left home coming to the federal building looking for the Marines, and got conned into going into the Army. Now, all this time, I'm trying to make up my deficit of knowledge, and I studied the classics. I was a teacher's pet. Teachers that everybody was afraid of. I found out they had a sense of humor, and I could relate. I have a sense of, a person like me has to have a sense of humor. A person in my circumstances. So, I did, I did quite well. But I learned. I took Spanish in high school and Latin, and at U of M, my experience at U of M was interesting. I passed. I got A's in Latin, and B's, but I was almost failing English. So, and one of the professors told me that I was wasting my time. I should go back down south to one of the black colleges. So I mean, I wasn't. If you're in a position where you've been through what I've been, you couldn't hardly hurt my feelings and insult me with something like that.
Was that your English teacher who said that?
Yep, at U of M. Professor Huntley was his name. But I'm telling you, I was learning the world, man. I did not know what, and I knew it. And I knew that I was reading Fiend.
Mm-hmm.
I read. I loved Macbeth, and I read all Shakespeare, Eugene O'Neill, etc., etc. As a matter of fact, when I was in the Army, me and this buddy of mine used to quote long passages from Macbeth, Hamlet. I know the soliloquies from Hamlet and Macbeth and the poetry and stuff like that. So I was learning because I was feeling an empty tank.
Did you, after you graduated high school, did you start exploring the metro area? Like, as you said, you started going to U of M. Did you go to U of M Ann Arbor?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. How was
U of M didn't exist at that time.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a difference between the Ecorse neighborhood you grew up in and then spending time in Ann Arbor?
Oh yeah. There were 33,000 students there. 300 of them were black. They were a different class. I'm a sharecropper, and these are doctors, lawyers, and teachers, kids amongst the blacks.
Mm-hmm.
I got along with them all, but I knew I was different. as a matter of fact, in high school, a very interesting thing happened. I didn't know anything about sports, but we played street football. And so one day on the playground, the professor, not the professor, the coach, the athletic director saw me throw a football. And he saw how far I could throw it. And how my side, he called me over, told me he wanted me to come out and play football for him. And he wanted me to play quarterback. And because the quarterback he had could not see over the lineman, he wasn't tall enough. And so I agreed. And I did well. So in my 2 years in high school, I was the quarterback for the football team and the captain of the basketball team. Which, you know, I mean, I'm just going through. I was kind of like Forrest Gump, I think. I was just doing things. I was learning and appreciating, but I didn't have much ego at that time, I don't think. But anyway, at U of M, I was there among the middle class folks. And, you know, they treated me nice, like, you know, we were all in the same boat, except that, like I said, I was different. But they were good. My roommate was my mentor, who was a year younger than me, which is strange. We're still the best of friends, although he has more infirmities than I do. But after that car wash day, I entered the Army. I went.
What year was that?
That was 1957. Mm-hmm. And I went to Missouri to the military base there, where I was I began my training, but then they shipped me to Fort Lewis, Washington, the state of Washington, where I spent 13 months. And I had a first sergeant who abused me terribly. I have to this day, I don't understand why this man didn't like me. And if you know about the military, the punishment that they mete out is KP, kitchen police. So he would frequently put me on KP for some excuse or another, which meant I'd have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, peel potatoes, and wash pots and pans. You know, very frequently. But we were in a specialized training unit, experimental unit, testing equipment, testing men to determine who what region of the country the best soldiers came from, and the people who make best soldiers, and that was Midwest, South, and Southeast. And so we went through a number of experimental things. We had to learn to ski with a backpack, weighing 90 pounds, pulling a sled, 3-man teams, 2 pulling a sled and 1 guiding it, and that had 250 pounds of equipment on it, plus weapons. You had tents and, you know, supplies and different things. And we had to ski through. We went to Alaska for 3 months and went through the mountains and had to maneuver up there. And my enemy, Sergeant Vargas, one morning we started climbing this mountain, on skis with the backpack and the sled and the weapons. And at midnight, we got to the top. It was pitch black up there. And the first thing out of his mouth was, Hamlin, you got the first watch. Now it's pitch black and you're on the mountain and you could fall off and it'd probably take you 10 minutes to hit the ground. But I had the first watch. I had to go around the perimeter. Plus the first night we got there, they had hired a hunter because there were bear tracks through the area. But he got me. So when we spent that 3 months testing equipment, we were testing the equipment, both the motorized equipment and the what we wore and the weapons and so forth. Then we left there and came back, and it was 3 months. Then we spent 3 months in the desert, and which basically consisted of sitting out on top of the mountain. And I don't know if you know, in the state of Washington, there's a desert called Yakima in eastern Washington, near Spokane. And we were sitting in this, and we sit down on this mountain for 3 months in foxholes, and with that heat and rattlesnakes. And they supposedly fired a atomic bomb in the area proximity to us. And when we came back from each one of these exercises, they interviewed us all individually. A psychologist from Columbia and somewhere else. They interviewed us, and that was the end of that. Fortunately, after that, I got shipped to Korea, which took me away from Sergeant Vargas, and I excelled over there. I became a sergeant. But Korea was kind of what awakened me. I began. We are over there, and Emmett Till happens, and Little Rock, SCLC, Montgomery. A lot of that, and there was our first night over there. We had a racial fight. There were 3 of us, and there was 9 whites, most of them from the South, Louisiana and Oklahoma, and so forth. And we were in a 12-man Quonset hut divided into 3 parts, and we were placed alphabetically. And there were 3 blacks, me, Hightower, and Hawkins. Hawkins was from Benton Harbor. I forget where Hightower was from. And so the first night there, we were. Like this is probably not what you wanted, right?
Oh yeah, this is all good.
Yeah. First night there, we were sitting. Me and Hawkins and Hightower were sitting in the middle room, which is where we were, and all of the whites are gathered in the room next to us, and they were talking and we were talking, and we kept hearing the word nigger thrown around. So finally, one of them, I guess it was me, said, "Man, you guys hear what I just heard?" I said, "Yeah, man, we heard it." I said, "Well, we got to put a stop to that." So the 3 of us marched over there. They were all sitting around, on the bunks and chairs and so forth. And we said, "Hey, man, you guys, we've been sitting up over here listening and hearing that word nigger being thrown around. You're not going to be able to do that around us." And this big guy who was about 6'2", about 230, Holland, New Orleans, said, well, I don't know what I'm going to call you because that's all I'd ever known. And he said, no, you ain't going to call her. You're not going to use that word here. So he said, well, maybe we better take this outside. And they said, yeah. So Hawkins, who was about 6 feet, about 170 pounds, said, well, man, I'll fight you. And so they decided that the two of them would go at it. Hamlin weighing 240 pounds. I'm worried to death about Hamlin. So we go out there. They gather on one side, and 3 of us on the other side. And Hamlin stepped forward, and Hawkins stepped forward. And so Hamlin lunged at him, and Hawkins hit him with a left hook, and then hit him with the right one, and staggered him, knocked him back. And Hamlin made a big bull rush, and Hawkins grabbed him in a headlock and rammed his head into a car's grill, and he was bleeding all over the place. So they said, no, we better stop. This got to stop now. So they stopped it, and we went back, and never had that incident again. So that, and aside from that, see, I maintain that all Americans, since they're so warlike, they like wars, they are do two things: enlist, and number 2, before they do, they need to go to France, to Normandy, and see that graveyard with 10,000 crosses in it. We have a son who lives in Paris, and we were visiting him quite regularly. Now he comes here all the time. But we went, the first time we went over and stood at the out there amongst those crosses. It's 10,000 of them, names on them, name unknown. Mm-hmm. So, and they go on and on. You can't see the end, and you can't see the end that way. If you stand on one side, you can't see the end. You stand here, you can't see the end. And it's the most eerie feeling. It's a very spiritual thing. So I think all these warmongering people need to, put up with, mm-hmm. put up, shut up. But anyway, that is what I was angry. This was the era of the black man, angry black man. And when I came back, there's a couple other things. You could see in Korea the effect of that war, which we didn't win, but we killed a whole lot of people. In North Korea, they destroyed every building that existed. People were living in caves. They would drive. I can imagine. They drove a fly B-52 over rice paddy. See a guy down there with an ox and a plow and drop one on him. Because a lot of times they come back. Like right now, they go on bombing runs in the Middle East, and they come back with their bombs. But there, you see somebody down there, a peasant, and so it kind of affected me. Plus, what was going on here? There was a lot of racial hostility building. George Wallace hadn't started, but he was on his way. Mm-hmm. So when I came back, I was.
What year did you come back?
In 60. In March of 60. And got a job. That's when I got the job at the Detroit News. I had U of M credits, and I had a military, so he hired me. I worked there 10 years. And the Teamsters claimed that I was 1 year short of a pension. I think they probably cheated me out of it, but that's one another damn. But anyway, I worked there, and I got married. Married a upper middle class girl from St. Louis, and it didn't work. You know, because I was beginning to move left, and she's a society girl, and her friends, they used to have parties all the time. We'd all, and the party was usually at our place. I lived on, I lived on Boston and Lawton, which was right over there near Central High School, where the National Guard was located.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, she was from St. Louis, and the family, she's the only Boston Episcopalian family was her mother came from. And, I was one of the lower classes. We gave it a go, but it didn't. It lasted about 4 years. And we got divorced, and it was very crushing for two weeks. After that, I became counselor ultimately, and I always tell people who had divorced who go on 2 weeks. I said, "Well, you can grieve for 2 weeks, but the other party is going on to a better life for themselves. You better take care of number one. 2 weeks. That's a good rule of thumb. If you ever decide to get divorced, you can grieve." I was sitting up in my house with a fifth of G&B Rare Scotch, and a fifth of it, and then a pint of Martin BPO Scotch. Listen to Ray Charles Country and Western Country and Western album, in which he has Born to Lose on there, and I Can't Stop Loving You. I do that for 2 weeks. But then one day, a light bulb went on. I said, up here like a fool. She took everything out of the house while I was at work. I worked double shift on Saturday. She got the van there and took all the money, including the money we had invested in a bank out in a black bank in Los Angeles that her brother-in-law was the vice president, and left me there. And I started having a good time. I started dating every single teacher in the school. But my friend who went to U of M, who was derailed in his drive to be a doctor because his girlfriend got pregnant, more than likely tricked him, and so he had to switch and go into teaching. But anyway, she was his cousin, so he moved in with me because he had got divorced, and he was teaching in this school, and he's introduced me to all these women.
So he was working at Central High School, or
no? This is in Inkster.
Oh, Inkster.
Yeah, he worked. He became superintendent of schools ultimately in Inkster. But I was just having a good time. Like a fool, with all the women. One of them I got pregnant. She was a teacher, and she was crazy. She would have killed me. So I had to leave there running. This was during the movement because my politics involved me, had me around a lot of women. But I didn't cheat when I was married. But my politics were, these women were not prepared for this. They were into being successful, middle class.
Mm-hmm.
And I was angry. That's what drove 67. That's what drove Black Power. That's what drove the movement. The urban black, the working class black, reached a point where he could not take it anymore. I told people many a time then And since then, during that period, I didn't care whether I lived or died, but I was going to live or die with some feeling of freedom, and in my mind, and I understood oppression, our oppression. I understood our exploitation. I had not only seen it, I experienced it, and I saw the family, how they were abused in the community, in the neighborhood. I was a helper. I used to do income tax for the older people in the neighborhood. I used to help them negotiate with some of these crooked furniture companies, like I forget the name of the one down in Wyandotte. I think it was called Moskins or something. What downriver were you?
I'm from Lincoln Park.
Oh, you right around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We used to play you guys in football.
You probably won. Really quick, before we get to 1967, what did you do at the Detroit
News?
Yeah, Detroit News.
I started off as a jumper, which was assisting the drivers. We'd take papers to stations and unload them, or where the newsboys were, or where were the guy who drove around downtown and put papers in the back. And shortly after I got hired there, which was 1960, they bought the Detroit Times. And all of us had seniority over all these people from Detroit Times. So I got to be a driver, and I drove for a while. And I took over a station over on the Cass corridor. And I ran that for a while. And then I started going back to school at Wayne State. So I went back to the truck driving job because that was more compatible with I had GI Bill. So I started going to Wayne, and that's when I got involved. I had gotten involved with Ken and John at the Detroit News. I would drive Ken to law school on my way to work. And he would join me later, part-time when he'd come to work. And sometimes he'd ride with me when we delivered papers. And John was working there and going to school. And together, we engaged on the dock and repartee with and we dominated the docks with all the other guys that were there. And because, their intellect and their capacity, their analytical capacity. Ken was like a machine gun. His talk, if you ever heard him talk, he sounded like a machine gun. And John was brilliant. They both were geniuses. It's a rare case where they were both geniuses, and I was very privileged and honored to work with them. But they were good friends, Like John, who graduated from Cass at 17, was the one who introduced me to Marxist analysis, and I introduced Ken, and we studied together, and we had good times together, and we analyzed the society, and grew angrier and angrier, and had to do something. Which brings us to, the civil rights movement started.
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, I had already seen enough outrages while I was in the Army and overseas at that. But we wanted to do something. John went down and attended Nashville to see if he could participate with SNCC. But he couldn't take those ass whippings. He wouldn't do it. So he came back. I didn't even go, neither would Ken. We wouldn't even consider that. Because Ken and I had been in the military. He was in the Air Force. I was in the Army. John had not. He's too young. He wouldn't go, he in general. But anyway, we were angry. And we were, by that time, in that period, there was we had gone through a flowering of the arts in the black among black artists, you know, cultural individuals, and there were books, key books that came out that affected us. James Baldwin's writing, Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, Richard Wright, Leroy Jones, etc. We were studying, we were rapping, we were talking, and we're pretty fierce debaters. But we also realized we had to do something, so we started working with some people. We raised money and goods for people in the South who had been, like in Tennessee, there was a place called Fayetteville, I think, where all the farmers had been kicked off the land, all the sharecroppers had been kicked off the land, and they set up a tent down there called Tent City. So we worked with Clegg and the Boggses and Snick and raised money and goods and shipped them down there to the people that lost their homes. All these things were making us further right. By the way, at the time in 1960, there was a Time magazine cover. I guess something like the Man of the Year was the Angry Black Man, and they had the picture of a black guy with bandoliers, across his chest and a rifle. So this thing was building. It's building up to Watts, 67 Detroit, Newark, and so forth. Within us, something was going to explode one way or another. I mean, I had some very nefarious ideas at the time. But anyway, that our folks had endured humiliation and abuse, and so long that there was rage within the young black man. The older people were prepared to keep going. Waiting, as Malcolm said, waiting patiently. But if they begin to say freedom now. As a matter of fact, in Detroit in the early '60s, there was a party founded by Clegg and the Boggs and the Henry brothers called Freedom Now Party. John Watson was part of it. And we emerged as a more militaristic approach.
Who's we?
And the group that eventually came together to form Drum and the League, and the Inner City Boys was the beginning.
Okay.
And we wanted a pound of flesh because the humiliation. I mean, we had worn a uniform. We had been good citizens, and the police brutality. They think it's bad now. It should have been here in the '60s. It was in Detroit. It was really bad, and other places too. I mean, it's fundamentally the catalyst for all of these rebellions and riots in the city. It was the overreach of the police, and this is going to happen again, based on what's being done right now. The rage is beneath. There's a book called Black Rage that you ought to check out sometime. I think it's by Greer and Price.
Mm-hmm.
It's like two psychiatrists, two black psychiatrists. you can get a feeling of pain that we experience. People who had some intellectual capacity, because if you understand the true nature of this country, you either become angry or you are in denial, or you deny it. And so, if you bought the idea that it was okay for the U.S. to invade Vietnam based on the false premise of the Gulf of Tonkin by LBJ, that was justification for going to kill millions of Vietnamese. If you are presented with a proposition that somebody as dumb as George Bush has the right to order shock and awe and the killing of millions of Muslims and still killing them, still going on, if you believe that is right and just, or as they say in the church, meet and just, then you're in denial. And that's where we are. It's not a question of I don't feel good with that. I don't wake up every morning feeling good about shock and awe, because you know that these fools, or if you think it was all right, it was a great thing that we dropped the atomic bombs on Japan. You got a different kind of thinking, but that's the way we are. And so we go along with things. I mean, if you're smart, you're strong, and sometimes if you without morals, you can succeed. Look at Donald Trump. You can you can fly high. Whenever I had a polemic against somebody, I would quote Cyrano. He says, "He flew high and fell back again."
Going into 1967, did you feel that this rage was also felt like outside of your core group of colleagues? Did you feel like this rage was across the city, across the nation?
Across the nation, as bewilderment. But you see, there's a lot of things that came together. There was the war experience, and if you study history, every time something cataclysmic happens, the outcomes are usually different. For example, World War II ended colonialism in the form that it was, where you had these superpowers dominating colonies, going way back to World War I and II, where they divided up the colonies between the British Empire, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Italians, the French, etc. They divided, and Britain had most of Africa, had control of China. French had Vietnam, who defeated them actually on the battlefield. But the fact of World War II, I and II, where they were fighting over the issue of who was going to control those colonies, get the resources and the market, weakened those countries. And the thing about it is that the U.S. came out as number one, along with Russia. So all of a sudden, England, and which had been the dinosaur, the giant on the world stage, had to begin with falling back. And then after World War II, Mao was able to free China. Um, the Soviet Union had been invaded a number of times by several countries, including the U.S. 3 times. They invaded the Soviet Union after 1917, but they didn't win. It's such a big country. It's complex. The temperature it makes it difficult, and the mountains make it difficult to fight there. So those forays into the Soviet Union by a lot of countries after the revolution in Russia all failed. So it gave rise after World War I and World War II, gave rise to the independence movement, and we used to quote the slogans. The people want revolution. Countries want independence. The people want revolutions. I forget what the other parts of it were. And that's happened. That's when, like I said, Vietnam defeated the French and drove them out. Mao led the Chinese in '49. Imagine a country that big being controlled by British, British governors, and rationalization from it, as they might have been civilizing bringing them to God. South Africa ultimately was brought down in the aftermath of the breakup of colonialism. The Africans began to fight.
Mm-hmm.
You run out of battery?
Just double checking.
Okay, if you want to speed up, we can.
Let's get to 1967 that week.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you first hear about what was going on? Where did you first see?
I was coming from my mother's house about 10 o'clock in the morning, and coming up 4th Street. I lived on Boston and Lawton at the time, and like I told you, I was talking to somebody anyway. I first began to see. I didn't have radio on, so I began to see a lot of frantic activity in terms of people driving. And as I came forward, I began to see smoke. And I knew something was wrong. And I turned the radio on to WWJ, and they were talking about it. And so I knew this had happened before in these other cities. I knew the nature of it, and I knew that there were certain people that were going to be under scrutiny during this time, amongst who would include me.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured that I had to find a circuitous way of getting home from 4th Street all the way down to Linwood and Boston. And so since I drove a truck throughout the city, throughout the whole region, I did this for 10 years. I knew all the ways to get around, so I started cutting through streets, and so I didn't go on main roads that were blocked. And finally, I made it home. Well, when the National Guard came in, which was at Central High School,
mm-hmm.
which was about a quarter mile from my apartment. All of a sudden, I'm at home, shades pulled, but keeping an eye out. And across Boston has an island in the middle there, and out there and sitting on the island or the berm, whatever, was the Jeep with a machine gun pointed at my apartment. And so I didn't know. I mean, I knew what was happening. So I stayed. I went down in the basement, and I called different people. I called General, and he was in the same kind of situation. And they stayed there for that day and night. So I was pinned down during that time. I couldn't go anywhere because they were all, the National Guard was right there in the midst of our area. They were occupied, and that General lived on Gladstone. I lived on Boston, so we weren't that far from each other. And I knew for sure that he was going to be one of the ones that was being watched. And I lived close to the Algiers Hotel, so there was a lot of action in our area. I was anticipating it. I knew there were people getting fed up, and I knew it was going to happen eventually. I didn't know what it was going to be. It's always a thing of letting off steam, but it also destroys the community. It's destructive to the community, and lives were lost. A lot of people were killed.
Were you afraid of being arrested as General Baker was?
And I was kind of fatalistic. I could think, and that was hard for you to realize this, but I could think that my life, there's some things better than living that way, living in fear, living, afraid, and especially after the army. Oh boy, the military experience is really, really educational. They can order you in a minute to kill somebody, or you can get killed in some other guy, your equivalent on the other side, open fire on you, kill you. So I've never been afraid of death. But what's happened to me, the only thing that kept me from doing a monumental destructive thing was that I thought I found a way that I could make a difference. And that was through politics, Marxist politics. That's through organizing. John and I believed that we could start something. John had been involved in a lot of startups, but they did not have the maturity, in my mind, this is my belief, to keep it together. They were always vulnerable to an attack. For example, one of the key people who was part of the group, that was group loyalty. But every time they would form an organization, basically based around Wayne State, there was this black woman who was part of the group who raised the issue that John Williams had a white wife, so they could not keep going with this organization as long as John Williams was in it. So they break up.
Before we get into your political activities afterwards, what would you consider? What term best describes for you what happened in 1967 in Detroit? Would you consider it a rebellion or a riot? Because you talked about that, okay. It ultimately failed.
It was clearly a rebellion. It was a rebellion against oppression and exploitation, but more so against oppression. It was a police state, and that's what happened in police states. and the it looks like the way things are happening now between cops and blacks, we might be heading toward that kind of. I mean, I knew I was in a police state. Growing up in Ecorse, the police used to mess with us. Used to try to provoke us and things. They was raiding people's houses and that kind of thing. So it was rage and rebellion in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
There were elements who rioted, but it was an expression of that rage, and it was a fight. It was a demand for change. Change or die, and I understand that. I mean, you can get to that place, and it's very dangerous what's going on now. Trump is going to get what he's asking for if he keeps going on with this stuff. Because I know some Muslims, and they're not going to, they're not going to let folks mess over them. I know a number of Muslims in the community down here, and like that crazy preacher is going to burn the Quran. He best not do that.
End of part 1. This is William Winkle. This is part 2 of my interview with Mike Hamlin. How did the events of 1967 impact your political activities?
Well, prior to 1967, John Watson and I had begun to discuss and go through the process of starting a newspaper based on a theoretical concept. And so what it meant was that we had to get the money and we had to get training. So John, who was a genius, who could sit down with a very complex machine, take it apart, and put it right back together, approached Peter Werby, and who was publishing the Fifth Estate, and asked him to show him how to produce a newspaper. And Peter showed him how to do it and what he needed in terms of equipment. I borrowed money from the Communications Workers Credit Union to buy the machine. Mm-hmm. It's called a justifier, which is in which sets type. I mean, which is what you type. It justifies the copy. And we rented a place over on Warren and right behind St. Paul's Church, and we started a newspaper called Inner City Voice. And it was not difficult to attract people. The first thing that happened, though, we published the first edition, and we had a lot of nationalists, what you call cultural nationalists, poets, and, artists, dancers, and actors, who hung around. We had rented a house that the newspaper was housed in, and some students, high school students, and they would help. For example, like there was an artist that I would give him an idea, and he would make a cartoon, very sarcastic, more than likely attacking Uncle Tom's. We had poets, and we published that poetry. But after the first edition, John and I did most of the work. John did most of the typing, I did a lot of the writing. In fact, the first front page article was one on the migrant farm workers down in the Monroe area where they were raising cucumbers and tomatoes and stuff like lettuce. and that was the first front page headline. And you know, we you know, published something by Ho Chi Minh and by Che Guevara. Well, after we produced it and started distributing it, the artist told us that, well, listen, fellas, you can't have nothing but black writers in this newspaper. You know, we can't have Che Guevara and Ho Chi Minh, etc. We said, well, we, you know, we can, we, you know, we that's bullshit. We're not going for that.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, we had a meeting to decide, well, you know, we know who own this place and who own this bank. And so after they left, I said, John, what we going to do? He said, well, I'm going to go get General, and he'll chase them away. So the next day that I came in the office,
Call from Mosley Robert.
he said, I mean, when I came to the office, they were gone, and General was there. And he and I bonded immediately, and he began to work on the, you know, like me and John on the paper. And John would work all night because he couldn't sleep anyway. You know, he would he'd get up in the morning, smoke a joint, drink wine throughout the day. Around 10 o'clock, he started drinking hard liquor. And by 3, he might take a pill. But you know, he'd work, but he wouldn't do it by himself. I had to stay there with him. So now, interestingly, before we got to the first edition, we were organizing, and we thought we would set up a fundraiser. Now, this is after '67.
Mm-hmm.
This was in '67. The rebellion happened in July. In September, Steve, the cry for Black Power had activated us, had caused us. We joined the movement, you know, in a sense, and it seemed like something we had been waiting for. The idea of self-defense. And so I began a correspondence with Jim Foreman. And I asked him if we could get Rap Brown, this is right after '67, to come to Detroit and speak. And he was a fiery orator who's going around saying, if Detroit don't come around, we're going to burn Detroit down. And he was delivering that message all over the country. So Foreman said, yeah, they came. Rap came with another guy. And we had him at was an abandoned theater. I don't know if it was abandoned or what, over on Dexter. But we held a rally there, and it was an overflow crowd. So after he spoke, and it took up a substantial collection, we had to go and took him up on the roof, and he's with a megaphone. He spoke to the crowd down there on the standing around out there, and all of a sudden some reporters started coming in, and here come the reporters. The reporters are our enemy, and the mob started chasing them down Dexter, man, where they fled. So it's a very inflammatory thing. But and that was before the first edition. Shortly after that, we published the first edition, and it drew more and more people, especially young people, to the newspaper because it was hard hitting, didn't pull any punches, was extreme. But it, spoke the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Things people wanted to say, but had not said.
Were you a member of Drum in 1968?
Yep, I was the founding member.
Okay.
Yeah, General had been fired from Chrysler, and he, one of the guys who was out there, would come by to visit General and tell him about the outrages going on in the plant and how the black workers were treated differently, and how there was public abuse. Now remember, a lot of these workers had come from the South, and they would tend to be deferential to whites, but these were young workers.
Mm-hmm.
This is a new generation, but the Kennedy economic program had brought more into the plants, so they were talking. I think once a week, Ron would come by there, Ron March, and talk. And so soon I started joining, and Jan and General pulled together. I think there were 9 of them, and we interviewed him. I interviewed him separately and write down the incidents that have taken place in the plant, and put it in the paper, and then we would distribute the paper at Dodge, Main,
mm-hmm.
and into the stores. But we started a newsletter for Drum, and it was hard hitting, and and spoke to what was going on in the plant, and it had newsletters even easier than the newspaper to do. So it had enormous impact. It began to rouse these young workers,
mm-hmm.
and it was attacking not only the company but the union too, and and really hitting the union hard, and they felt it. But we were young, we were angry, and so neither union nor the company wanted to mess with us. Plus, we had about 30 lawyers supporting us. We had interesting relationship with the young lawyers. A lot of young lawyers came here to neighborhood legal services, and I did the orientation for them when they came to town. I oriented them to Detroit in the community. And Ken, met a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
So he and Justin's work influenced them. So when we, for example, struck Dodge, Main, we had 30 lawyers willing to take depositions to do whatever needed to be done. It was a different time, we weren't, the blacks were not the only people who were angry and motivated. lot of, as you know, a lot of young professionals came here to work with us. But anyway, it took off. The newsletter took off like wildfire, and then we started doing them in other plants, at the Eldon plant, at Cadillac, Ford. I mean, we had some outrageous stories. The woman that Chrysler forced to come back to work in a wheelchair, and they told her she had better come back to work. She said, "Well, I'm on sick leave. I'm in a wheelchair." I said, "Well, we'll meet you at the gate. Somebody will put you in." So they did that, and I'm not sure, but I don't know whether she died or not. I think she might have. But they were outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, and it attracted more and more. And then I got involved with these students. We had so many kids from these high schools, and they had their own issues, and helped them get organized. I was their advisor, and helped them get organized. And they began to. They'd already struck on their own at Northern High School.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck Colden, so we incorporated them and gave them the support, a place to meet, newsletters. They did a newsletter. That group was called the Black United Front, and Black Student United Front. But it was a good time for organizers.
Can you talk about the transformation of Drum into the League of Revolutionary Black Workers?
Okay. Well, we had all these components that developed. There was the newspaper. There were the reprinted and published pamphlets and books. We were involved with the fight over the decentralization of schools with Coleman Young. We had the Black Student United Front. We had groups at Chrysler, Eldon, Dodge, Maine. We had a group at Ford. And I personally was involved in helping organize the Welfare Workers Organization. The Welfare Workers were not in the union. And we formed the Welfare Workers Organization. They eventually ended up in AFSCME, but we got them organized. I personally was involved in organizing the secretaries at Wayne State. And we did a lot of that kind of stuff, help unions, groups trying to get organized. We were involved in an attempt to organize Ford Hospital, and it failed. It failed every time, because the ethnic makeup over there. The Filipinos, I'm told the Filipinos are not interested in union. They don't have no history, and I guess Ford terrorized them. But we had all these components, and publishing, filmmaking, and so we had to find a way to link them together, and we did. That was the league, and we had a central staff and an executive committee, and we had great success. But, ideology, see, people don't talk about American ideology or even know what it is. But it's capitalism, and which is individualism.
That'll pick up on the recording.
What will? That noise?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. It's a funny phenomenon. Understanding, in my view, America is a fraud. And if you do understand it, and you have two choices. one, you try to expose it and fight it, or two, you go into denial. And so what happens is that there's a constant striving for for success, for glory, for power in the individual. And you can be engaged in a great cause, and people might end up looking at you as a hero, or as some powerful figure, and that can easily go to your head. Or if, for example, you're part of the effort and you don't feel that you're getting the glory that the other people are, we try to downplay individual plaudits. In fact, we understood that enough in the beginning to state that. But at a certain point, people want to enjoy their successes. You haven't accomplished a whole lot, but people think people appreciate what you've done, and so that's the problem in putting together an organization like the League. It was undeveloped politically, and so people come in, didn't take the educational process serious. We had an education unit. They thought some of them thought the classes were boring. They wanted action. so that was the beginning of the League. We expanded as a result of our successes. Foreman came here because SNCC had shut down based on the Black Power. The students got tired of taking them whippings, and he had gone out and couldn't make it with the Panthers, and he opted to come here. Now, some people had told me in advance, Foreman is the kind of guy who wants to control or destroy. But so he came here and lived with us for a year and a half. That didn't work too well. But a part of it, I don't want to blow my horn, but one of the roles I played was keeping it together. Mm-hmm. Because I had some very powerful egos around me. And brilliant people. John Watson, Ken Cockrell. General had humility. He never lost his focus. John William Blue Tripp. These were all smart folks, and they, like I said, they kind of understood what I was talking to you about in these kind of organizations. But anyway, we put it together, and immediately there was clashes of egos. There were all kind. We had relationships. I had helped organize the Motor City Labor League. I asked these whites to come together and overcome some of their differences and form this organization, because I could see a lot of potential for it. And they agreed. I think I had about 6 or 7 of them there, and people who had influence and had practice, were good people, and that took off. And that, we could work together. They could give us support, because I didn't want us to be isolated. We were having some internal shenanigans that caused me to worry, that trouble, that we were playing with some dangerous things. Some people were. and I'm becoming irresponsible. And so I organized Motor City Labor League. I organized an organization called the Alliance, which was a group of religious figures, men and women, good people. And we got involved with the Black Workers Congress, which was an attempt to force the churches to face their history of exploitation and role in slavery and Jim Crow and all of the other evils of the country, and they responded, a lot of them.
And that's when the Black Manifesto was written?
Mm-hmm. And that was the basis. We issued it we would walk in the church during the service and pass them out and read them. And that was happening all across the country. We did it in about 9 churches in this area, including one black church. Of course, the pastor was in on it and part of it. But that's where the BWC came about, and we were getting, we had all this growth, but the consciousness and the understanding did not keep up with the development. So if I would say, if you would ask me what brought about the demise of the league and the BWC, and I do believe there have been some false narratives put out, but it had to do with 2 things. People's ideological weaknesses that made them want, first of all, they argued for being part of the leadership. There's a problem with that. The problem with it is that there are secrets that the organization has that you cannot share with everybody. So they figure you're withholding information from them. But rationality should tell you that in an atmosphere like that, the police is not far away. That's number one. But people wanted to be part of a decision-making process and wanted to know everything that was going on. This is a dangerous game. Okay, the other thing about it, that's called ultra-democracy, by the way. The other thing about it was that there's a class thing involved because Americans don't understand a class analysis. Each class has certain characteristics. There's the upper class, capitalist class, or whatever you want, bourgeoisie, whatever you want to call them. There's the middle class, which has, I would say, 3 strata. The upper class, middle class, and the lower middle class. And the poor. In agricultural society, there would be peasants, farmers, individual farmers. And then there's what Marxists call D-class elements. And that would be, he's much harsher. He talks about the scum of the earth, but you talk about, itinerant people who don't have employment, perhaps can't have employment in a country like this. If you have handicap, homeless, you're born into terrible circumstances, you get abused as a child. That's a difficult thing for people, and those. Anyway, what that's called is D-class, folks. Now, what does that mean concretely? Well, I tried my best to establish a moral standard within the organization because we were attracting people's teenage kids, including teenage girls, on the one hand. On the other hand, we were attracting this D-class group that I was talking about. In some cases, thugs. In some cases, maybe people who are a little mentally unstable, but it's not apparent. Thugs. We didn't knowingly have any addicts, but I'm sure we had drunks. And they engaged in reckless behavior. As a result, one teenager was killed at a high school dance. Two, one 16-year-old girl who's very high on the student, may have been tops in her class, got pregnant by a guy with very little going for him. Three, there were a couple of rapes that took place in the office. So those were the things that brought about disintegration of the organization. Now the particular splits, the split with General was over those issues. The split with Ken was they wanted to go into electoral politics, and we always had a policy against that. But that's what it was about. And it's a difficult thing to do, to hold something like that together. These guys, if I hadn't been in between all these guys, they would never have hung together that long. Their egos were too big. And if we approached it differently, they wouldn't have, that would have come to the fore. Mm-hmm.
So after, and John Watson left the league with you?
Yeah, John just walked away because he told me, I only saw him once after that. He told me that the FBI had told him that he better get out of town, before it was too late, or something to that effect. So he disappeared. And as I recall, as I understand it, he went to work at IBM out in Pontiac or somewhere. Remember, I told you he was a genius, so he was one of the very earliest understanding the computer.
Mm. And after you left the league, what did you continue your activism in the early 70s?
No, when I told the group that left with me, we had a meeting. I said, look, guys, the movement has come to an end. You don't want to go where these other guys are going. Because they were going into rote Marxism and, really heavy authoritarian. I said, what you need to do, and what I'm going to do, is find something where I can help people, and I can feel like I'm helping mankind, even if I had to do it one at a time. And from there, I went on to a glorious career. I have awards. I have all kind of plaques and rewards from UAW. I'm a retired member, honorary retired member of 2 UAW locals. Local 600 sponsored my retirement. I continue to have a relationship, a great relationship with UAW. And this is after we had gone through a period where we was shouting, UAW means you ain't white. What I did was I went back to school, got a master's in social work, became a clinical social worker, worked with troubled workers at Ford, GM and Chrysler, but mainly with Ford. I probably had face-to-face meetings with 10,000 auto workers, face-to-face over a 16-year period, where my job was to diagnose them and find us a program that would rehab them and go back to work. The company accepted the idea that it's better to rehab a good worker who has succumbed to alcohol or drugs than to hire somebody off the street. And there is really a generational work ethic difference. And I see it very clearly. I had a glorious job. So did all the people who worked with me. They loved it. I became the manager of this group of clinicians who served the workers, mostly in this region, but I did work out of state. I became a crisis manager. The shootings at Ford, I managed the workers to get them back to stability after the shooting. The one that's at Wixom, the same thing. There were others, Ford Sheldon Road, even at some 7-Elevens in Banks. So I had a glorious career. I feel good about it. About a month ago, on the 17th of October, I had my 80th birthday. There were 112 people there, and they were all the people that I had been involved with, plus my family, in the movement, black and white, labor, lawyers, doctors, all the progressive, not all of them, but all of the progressive that were close to and available to me. And we had a great time. We had it at this restaurant out on off of Jefferson called They Say. And we had a good time. I said at that time that it was time for us to have a collective hug of appreciation for what we all had done together. And that I tried to get them to stay off of my birthday and focus on us, what we had come through. Because a lot of people, when they got involved in the movement, their parents were very much opposed to it. Family, angry, isolated sometimes for a while, paid the price. We all paid the price. Some people went to jail, but we did good. I'm very proud of the 2 watches I got from Local 900, which is the Wayne Assembly, the big plant, and Local 723, which was the Monroe Stamping Plant, and 600, which I'm like a member there. So it's been a glorious life.
Just a couple of wrap-up questions. How do you feel that 67 affects the Metro Detroit community? Do you think it still does?
Oh yeah. First of all, blacks have always been. There's a couple of historians. What's your discipline, by the way?
History.
Okay. A guy named J.A. Rogers, J.A. Rogers, and James Baldwin, who's not a historian, but he does cover history, who says that blacks are a despised people. And that's true because the if you know, since you know the history of this country, when they found it, with all these resources and all this land, the ideal land for raising cotton, they needed a labor source. Couldn't make the Indians do it. They eventually committed genocide on the Indians. They had emptied all the prisons in Europe to populate here and Australia. And so when they found the African, they found what they needed and what they wanted. And so as they began commerce, selling cotton to the world market, other countries had ended slavery, including Britain, and they would say to the American, how in the world why do you treat these slaves so bad? Nobody in history has ever treated slaves like you do. They said, well, these slaves are not human. That we think they're somewhere between a man and an ape. And from 1800 to 1850, leading researchers, led by the great Samuel Morton of Harvard, was trying to prove this hypothesis. And are you familiar with it? So they collected these skulls, 1,000 skulls, 1,000 black skulls, 1,000 ape skulls, and 1,000 white skulls, and tried to prove that the size of the black brain was in between the two. And Morton gave up and said it's not true. He was an honest researcher. The South refused to accept that. They continued to propound that idea and still do. So I forget what the original question was.
How do you believe, if you do, how does 1967 continue to affect the Metro Detroit area?
Okay, so what happened in this area was the rage which you see now among white males. Because, and remember, we all came from the South. Guess what? There were a lot of whites who came from the South. We brought our culture with us. Guess what? They brought their culture with us. So there are a lot of people with the Southern background in this area. And one of the things that they do, they have great contempt and hatred for us. And it's not just them. If you're a historian, Brooks Patterson, for example, has been, Coleman Young like it drove him crazy. He hated Coleman Young, and and in fact, it's in writing, where he said he don't give a damn about Detroit. He hoped it burns down. It's in this book by this Israeli called Zeb Shevitz or something like that. They also have a quote from Rolling Stone from Brooks, an interview with him, where he lets Detroit have it. And so the movement to the suburbs had begun before 67. Part of it was they're making more money. wanted more space. But part of it was to separate. And there are areas like Macomb County where a lot of races, Patterson, I was saying, that they're also, the history of the Irish in this country and how they were treated when they first came.
Mm-hmm.
It's also true of Poles. I have a lot of friends who are Polish, including one that I see all the time downstairs in the bar, and we talk, right? Because I used to work with them at the Detroit News. Mm-hmm. So they have to separate themselves. So there's been a lot of hostility between blacks and Irish, and to a degree with Poles, on both, and it comes from both sides. So Detroit, that escalate the flight, and I'll let you in on a little phenomenon. I was just telling my Polish friend the other day because he brought up I asked him if he was proud of his Polish heritage. He said yes, and he's one of I work with guys at Detroit News. 3 brothers, 2 of them changed their name, and the other one kept the name, and the one who kept the name, the father disinherited the other and gave him everything. But anyway, so what you do is, you want to join the majority culture. So, for example, the white worker was turned against the slave who should have been his ally because he was made white and therefore was not on a level with these animals or these subhumans. So anyway, what happened was 67 accelerated the flight and intensified the hostilities, and it not only just created hostility that's there, politicians continue to use it, and it's beginning to escalate it at this point. Notice Charleston, South Carolina. Now, can you imagine something like that? That's where the 9 people got killed in the church in a Bible study. Mm-hmm. And the man, the 20-year-old man who was doing it, was trying to bring about the race war. So, anyway, 67 accelerated white flight and widened the gap between the races in this area. And even though the young people have not bought into that, and they come back. Oh, the thing I was going to tell you about, funny thing about that period, I worked for an organization called Geriatric Screening for 5 years.
Who?
Geriatric Screening. And what our role was, we had to go into these elderly people's home who had dementia or Alzheimer's and were slipping. Like, for example, they go, these old women, a lot of old Polish women, but a lot of all kind of ethnic women living on the east side. The kids moved away to Macomb County or somewhere, left mama there. The dad's dead, or was even working in the plant. And these elderly ladies are in those houses, and they begin to deteriorate. And they drive out to Eastland, and then they don't know how to get back home. Eastland police would pick them up and call us to come see them. I go out and see them, get the family together, and we work out a plan to get them into a assisted living facility that is of good quality. But there's a bunch of them on the east side because the kids had just walked away, and I don't think they understood what they were doing to mama, because, like I said, the men out and the women outlived the men.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for sitting down with me today. I greatly appreciate it.
I appreciate your what do you call it? Willingness to listen. You do whatever you want to with it. Do with it.